I think it's important to introduce the content of the symposium today as a part of the idea of regeneration, which I think they are both very coherent. So the museum is the result of an international competition, which was done nearly 10 years ago. An international competition who was won by Saarbrücken Office. And I think one of the reasons why this project won the competition was because this project has the capability to solve a very complex situation. Mestre is a kind of second Venice. Is the Venice on the terraferma, as they say, on the mainland, and in the center of the city of Mestre, which has nearly 200,000 inhabitants, which has a history of post-war heavy industrialization. So it's a city full of physical and social contradictions. And in the center of the city, you have the former monastery, which became a place for the military. The typical story, of the traditional compound. Well, don't say nothing. The traditional compound inside the city, which became a kind of black hole for the city itself. Because after the monastery, after the army, after the offices, this place became a kind of black hole. Everybody was walking around this huge area in the center of the city for decades, and after a long period, don't say nothing. After a long period of political discussion, Fondazione di Venezia decided to invest more than 120 million euro, so a huge amount of money, to regenerate the whole area. So the competition was bringing two main concepts. The first of all, to bring back this area to the city, so to make it completely crossable, to be completely open as a public space. In the meantime, to design a new museum. And this is M9. M9 Museum is the only museum devoted to the history of 20th century in Italy. It's very interesting because a country... Yeah, but I mean, I can talk. Don't say nothing. I mean, I give the back to them. But I mean, I was intended to say that, so I'm not making longer. Don't worry, Matthias. So I remember once I was opening an exhibition, I was curating, and the graphic designer was still taking pieces. So I was talking, and people say, 10 more minutes. So okay. No. But I'm good to speak hours, so don't worry. But I will not. Okay, so museum is the only museum devoted to the history of 20th century in Italy, which is a kind of a weird thing, considering the fact that the country like us never faced such a difficult century through a museum. We don't have any museum about that in Rome, in Milano, in the big cities. So Cesare De Michelis, who was an amazing historian, has this idea to bring a museum here devoted to the history of 20th century, since Mestre is one of the enigmatic place to represent the 20th century. A place of heavy industrialization, a place of terrorism, a place of political discussion, a place of social changes. So this place was in a way embodying 20th century somehow. And so the idea was to design a museum devoted to that. And but as most of the contemporary museum, a museum without contents, without physical contents. So the museum did deals with the more than 170 archives all over Italy. And so this became the most important multimedia museum about oral history, contemporary history in Italy. And the idea of the museum is based on what we call cultural history, material history. So it's the description of our history through our life, through everyday life, everyday object, everyday elements. So 8 sections in the 2 floors, in the 2 main floors of the museum, which are telling about us. And then the 3rd floor, which is devoted to contemporary exhibition. And now we have this beautiful, I must say, but I really feel it, a beautiful exhibition designed by Matthias and Louise and the office about Saarbrücken, which in a way represent our philosophy, because it's an exhibition for everybody. It's not an exhibition for a specific elite of architects who can feel the difference between one argument to another, but it's something that can impress you, but in the meantime can give you all the contents to go in deep. So as the 2 level, which I love in the exhibition, so to emotion you, and in the meantime to give, which I think is the most important elements designing an exhibition. So the museum has been opened in December 2018. Then after 1 year, it was closed because of pandemic, and for 11 months, the museum has been closed. I was called as a new director nearly 1 year ago. I remember I was called the 16th of October, and after 10 days I was in the bed with COVID, so I would have understood something about that the museum was poisoning me, but I resisted. And we are reframing the museum. The museum is not only a museum, it's mainly a cultural institution, it's a home open to communities, it's a place devoted to contemporary, to look at the changing elements which are pressing in a reality which is changing heavily. No? So we are living a deep metamorph, and this is one of the reasons why we are here. The reality is living a deep metamorph, bringing us new questions, new desire from society. And architecture is being called to give a new vision, new answer to this pressing sense of changing reality. No? So the museum is not only a museum devoted to 20th century, this is just the starting point, but all the exhibition we will do in the next years will be mainly devoted to the present and to the next future. And I think this is one of the main civic and political role of an institution like M9 today here. So since apparently the computer is working, so you will see the exhibition after all, don't worry. So I'm very happy to introduce, so I can make a change of my head. The future of the architectural profession was an argument we discussed with Luisa and Matthias in the previous months, asking ourselves, what can we do in relation to Draw, Law and Build, which is the title of the exhibition? What can we bring here as a broader discussion? And we thought that the best way was to reflect on this changing situation, on the role of architecture, on this also changing role in relation to what we should do for the next decades. No? Since environmental issues, political issues, social issues are pressing so much. So what can we do in this strange and complex situation? So this is the way we are, and we have a fantastic panel of a lecturer today. So I will list them all. So this morning we have Eric Parry from London, and Anh-Lin from Berlin as well, and Fernanda Maio from Heuvel, Venice, and Gundula Rakowitz from Heuvel, and Dirk van de Heuvel from Rotterdam. And we start with those friends, and I'm very happy to have all of them here. So I would invite Eric Parry to start, and hopefully the machine will work. We'll see. I cross the fingers. And well, Eric, please, I give you the floor, and thank you all to be here. And I hope it will be a challenging day of discussion, not only of good presentation, but of exchange. And please consider M9 as a place to come, to see, to be here, to exchange, and a place where we are also in the next future we can imagine and do things together. Thank you so much. Okay. Since Livio is there, I want to thank you, Livio Carrer, who is one of the historians working for the museum, who devoted the last 2 months in helping us to design and work on the exhibition, on the symposium. So if everything is going wrong, it's his fault. No, I'm kidding. Clearly, I'm kidding. It's my fault, as usual. Okay. So the title of the intervention of Eric Parry is "The Way We Built and the Future of Our Profession." So it's a very heavy and good starting point.
Thank you. So
you're mostly welcome.
Oh, look, brilliant. So thank you. It's all up and running.
Let's sit there.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, wonderful to be with you here. I wanted to draw attention to what I believe is a paradox, which in this very brief time, which I'll stick to, I intend to explore. It's the opposite direction in which the building industry, of project managers and contractors, is orientated to those of the world of design and architecture. These differences of orientation are hardwired, I think, early in the careers of the participants in separated educational goals of what constitutes the idea of success in each field, with a game, so to speak, arbitrated and decided by clients and planning authorities. So whereas an original or innovative formulation often needs, in its development, a new tussle with orthodox practice, which is a common goal of designers. The opposite tends to be the case for project managers, who are searching principally for the least path of resistance, the most effective, quick, and easy route to the goal of completion. For the visual arts, including architecture, with whatever resources in meagerness or plenitude, the idea of manifesting a surprising ease through an arduous creative journey is the hallmark of a successful project. This effectively was the balance between the idea of difficoltà, facilità, with a certain sprezzatura or haughty confidence, as well argued by David Summers in his book, Michelangelo and the Language of Art, 1981. This is just a figure from a lunette in the Sistine Chapel, part of two-figure composition around the window. So the only vertical surfaces of this first stage of Michelangelo's paintings, which illustrates the Old Testament forefather, Aminadab, who's on the left of this, but is this amazing image of a woman combing her hair, which, combines foreshortening, line, shadow, gesture, movement, and sound even. And Michelangelo's admiration of his forebears, the painters, for instance, Luca Signorelli, where he talks about the difficulty of that manner found agreeable. So it's at this point, I'd like to say, how agreeable the occasion is in honor of the work of Sauerbruch-Hutton, and the brilliant and well displayed exhibition above, with its multiple layers of satisfaction. It's also to come here to this building, which requires intense study, is a very good parallel to that idea of difficulty made apparently easy. One could talk about so many strands in Sauerbruch-Hutton's work. There is, of course, color and the manifold materiality. There is also the subject of the juxtaposition of elements, and then the juxtaposition in the scale of application, of which I might choose, by two examples, the Brandhorst Museum in Munich, with its amazing pixelated battens, or I might choose the K House in Munich, with its even smaller pixelation. These are, of all the projects, one finds that sense of admiration and satisfaction, with, I would argue, a creative dialogue with industry. So in each of the projects. So whilst there is that difference in terms of the profession, it is possible to negotiate a world between and maintain an integrity. On the other side of industry is the desperate struggle, which one must have a sympathy for too, to succeed and to prosper. So I would say the struggle between, taken from that perspective, of Europe and China and the US and then Asia, for a company like Gartner's, you know, of projects by them are illustrated here, themselves subject to a merger and an acquisition by Permas de Lisa here in Italy. And their influence, I've had the privilege of a walk with Herr Fritz Gartner around the city of London, at which he would point to one building being a tower that he started as a translator for his father, who was building that envelope, and then to the Lloyd's building by Richard Rogers, and then to Broadgate, and now to 22 Bishopsgate, the tallest building in the City of London. So the City of London, you know, the manifestation of the architectural attention are there in an industry of real power. Their maxims, of course, are the maximum erection of units in a day, minimizing the hook time of, thank you, that's really kind, actually, I'm thirsty. I'll just take the bottle, thanks. Minimizing hook time of the cranes, erection without scaffolding, no external finishing after erection, the rise of an expert sub-consultant over the last 20 years in facade engineering, one of many, and I would argue a resultant homogeneity, which is bordering on the terminal. So it reduces architecture to a sense of skin. And that is part of our struggle. As I walk around, you know, I pick up my camera sometimes just to record things that are passing. And you have here just an example, as I do in this next one, of a world that is make-believe. It could be a film studio, but actually it's the world, it is the materiality of the world that is becoming more and more prevalent. I would quote, I would quote from Immanuel Kant in this respect, where he raises the question about authenticity. What do poets praise more highly than the nightingale's enchantingly beautiful song? And yet we have cases where some jovial innkeeper, unable to find such a songster, played a trick, received with great satisfaction initially on the guests staying at his inn to enjoy the country air by hiding in a bush some roguish youngster who, with a reed in his mouth, knew how to copy that song in a way very similar to nature's. But as soon as one realizes that it was all deception, no one will long endure listening to the song that before he had considered so charming. Whereas the real deal makes us feel joyful and content with our existence. Yeah, so the question of scaling, I should have also mentioned with the envelope contracting world that because everything is raised from an interior that is constrained by structure, that the joint dimension is maybe a maximum of 3 meters preferred, could be 4.5, might at a stretch be bigger. But I'm brought to a reflection on the idea of joints and a tradition of that was seen in classical times, of course, of being very important, of those elements that were formed ex uno lapide, out of one stone. The Pantheon Columns being a prime example. There's these amazing monoliths, you know, are 40 foot high. I'm in Imperial. But in fact, the analysis shows that the whole composition would, I think, have been satisfactory at 50 foot. So there was a compromise, I guess, and there is a question, you know, in this amazing achievement of where 50-foot shafts are known, but where they were taken from, you know. If you go across the water, there's one argument that's Egypt, another that it might be Sardinia, coming to Ostia and then to Rome, out of these amazing geological places that gave rise to that site. This is a struggle with difficulty on a monumental scale. And I would argue also that if we look at the way in which we talk a lot about, clearly, about sustainability of environment, I would show some of the erosion, not just in the rise of seawater, but in the erasure of fantastic traditions. This is a map of the early 20th century of the tribal groupings around the Middle East of Arabia. And just a reminder, this is the typical meeting house on the right of the Marsh Arabs. You know, 500,000 people who have been, you know, in cycles oppressed for various reasons. Their waters drained, reduced to very small numbers. A wonderful culture, perhaps as in its transience, perhaps, however, you know, the equal of those wonderful Pantheon Columns, with an entire culture that gets reduced to the problem of through economy, to the boundaries of a state. This is the shanty towns outside Kuwait, in which the Bedouin had found themselves creating informal shelters, with an industry based on the import of cars and the packing cases for those cars that are then transformed into these dwellings in a very clever way. It's a sad commentary on a lost world. These are photographs from about 1975. I just wanted to reflect on a few of our own struggles, my practice's struggles with materials, and the world in which one comes to create through understanding of industry possibilities. So this small building in Bath is in cast ceramic, as opposed to a world of that we know perhaps from this building and others of extruded ceramic. In a project which I won't illustrate other than the plan, there was an issue of how one might engage with industry and economy of extrusion curves to take the eye. So these are full-scale mock-ups of a radius precast at the ground, and then the scale of extruded elements that might be brought together to, in their shadow, deceive the eye in terms of that organic plan. And that is followed through to a building very recently complete in Singapore, where we took the extruded elements to create these brise-soleil that provide shade and also an edge to this building. I'm only going to talk about that one element. On a building that rises above a Zaha Hadid master plan that meant that the public flowed under the building so that the building didn't occupy the whole of the site, and the floor plates float above that in this parkland to which it connects and fall back to create landscape terraces. That is entirely apart from the structural trees that you may just have seen here that take a 9-meter grid to an 18-meter grid in that public realm. Apart from those circular elements, everything is an extruded element. And that was the discipline of engaging with about 6 radii, the fabrication of the whole perimeter of the building to create its organic placement, which was maybe appropriate in this context. Turning to stone, again, in a kind of anger at the way stone was being used as, I know we're in Venice, so Venice has a wonderful tradition of using slab stone as thin bed, and for good reason in terms of loading. But generally, I was amazed, this is going back 20 years or so, at the amount of money that was expended on the fixings of stone. So stainless steel, absolutely profligate in order to hold up like bathroom tiling stone on buildings. And so with others, there are plenty of other examples, but of working with stone. In this instance, 25 pieces of stone that are drawn together with these 3-dimensional notches, and then pulled together in post-tension but solid stone. And I used solid stone on a building in London with 16-meter spans onto it. So there's no steel in terms of the vertical elements. They are all stone piers that are prefabricated and drawn to site. In a way that meant that the building could be unorthodox in terms of it being a stacked build, but at the same time conform to industry's requirements of a kind of speed of integration. And a building that is nearing completion, 3 buildings in Chelsea, where the facade is in load-bearing stone, allowing the fenestration to be very free behind it, and a kind of sense of movement that's established as a weaving of glass in behind the stone. But these are apartments when finished, but the sense that you have a complete openness. You see that the structure is all contained within those piers, played against the glass and the handrails. And then finally, I think for my half hour, just on this reflection of working with industry, that stone, it's critical there, in my view, that there is no vertical joint, clearly, because those piers are simply solid and drawn together. In the same way with steel, this project finished a year or 2 ago in the King's Cross development in London, was or started as a given site plan from the master plan, but it had to one side and the other, as you'll see, what has now become the School of Arts, the gasometers, the industrial past the 19th century, and so it felt fitting to me to have an exposed steel structure, a load-bearing frame, that is made of corten, and that or weathering steel, and the undulation of the surface is allowed to have an ordering with this virindal, which spans some 27 meters on the front, not unlike these wonderful beams in this building, probably 40 meters with the slot window as an expression of that structure. In this instance, the virindal picks up the conventional span above with boxes of weathered steel that have them within the box a sacrificial element in terms of fire engineering, which is pretty neat. These are drawn down from the north of England. I think there's a little movie, the last couple of minutes of my presentation, about the engagement with really, I mean, this is nothing, I guess, for infrastructure work of bridge building, but in architectural terms, it's of a scale. These are 70-ton sections that are drawn down with those stainless steel hands behind that pick up simply the concrete slab. So it's a building that achieved a very high level of certification, of outstanding in terms of its environmental qualities. But it's an ode in a way to the engagement with industry and certainly the expression of that. I firmly believe that your engagement, haptic engagement with a building, starts with the presence of material. And in this case, those piers that are made of billets of welded material of up to 100 millimeters, are something that even the layperson appreciates, as they do a solid piece of stone. So it seems to me that the difficulty that we engage with is, in terms of industry, is part of the pleasure that will give rise to the appreciation of a building over time. So in this instance, these segments were welded together on site, and in one of the rare occasions where that horrible term value engineering has given rise to, I think, a very happy conclusion, the rest of the elements were bolt riveted together to create a sense of the fabrication of the building. So 3 materials, 3 tectonics, 3 industries, but one objective, like the very empathetic work I find of Sauerbruch Hutton. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eric. I will keep the discussion afterward, I would say, so we save some good time. So I give the floor to Anh-Lin, who's the chief editor of Arc Plus from Berlin. So, Han, welcome. And the title of his talk is CC, Capital and Care.
Thank you very much, Luca Molinari, for the introduction, and also thank you very much, Louisa Hutton and Matthias Sauerbruch, for the initiative for this symposium. And I just had a very quick look upstairs, but I would like to congratulate the whole office to this magnificent building, and for the fantastic show you've put up here. As Luca already told you, that I was about to talk about capital and care. In a way, it is an argument of this speech, but I changed the title a bit. Because when I spoke to Matthias to prepare my contribution to the symposium, he explicitly asked me to think about an encounter he has had during the Pavilion's Day at the Architecture Biennale this September. He witnessed a conversation of representatives of the Association of German Architects and other officials of professional organizations with young architects who claimed that instead of being the master builder, Baumeister, they'd rather be caretaker, Hausmeister, in the future. This observation somehow disturbed Matthias, and so he asked me to share my thoughts on it. I agreed because I think this shift in the professional self-image is quite telling. If we want to think about the future of the architectural profession, as the symposium is titled, it is telling because the underlying question is a fundamental question for the discipline. We could rephrase it, in my view, this, in my view, false opposition of Baumeister and Hausmeister, of the master builder and the caretaker, in more discursive terms. Is architecture a political language, or is architecture politics? For the sake of rhyme, the debate at the German Pavilion misused the technical tone of the Baumeister, which comes from a craft tradition. In fact, what they, the participants, meant was that they don't want to be the genius modern architect anymore. We could talk about the implications of sustainability and climate change and so on, of course, but I think the problem runs deeper. So let us first have a look at what the reasons could be why the young architects don't want to be architects anymore. What is the reason of this fatigue? So I would draw, of course, from my own practice, which is the making of the magazine, to make some arguments for today. As I have noted in the forthcoming issue of I+ on the politics of facade, the emergence of the modern architect coincides with the invention of the facade as an independent building task. In the 15th century, theorists such as Leon Battista Alberti and Filarete sought to separate the architect from the craft tradition of the master builder by highlighting the architect's role as the originator and author of architectural concepts and plans, or, as Filarete put it, as a thinker who draws. It is within this epochal shift that we have to contextualize Alberti's and Filarete's treatises on architectural theory, in which they sought to establish architecture as a political language, and thus elevate the architect discursively to eye level with the political rulers, as the French historian Patrick Boucheron has convincingly argued. This trick had far-reaching consequences for the self-image of the discipline. From that point on, according to Boucheron, I quote, "The architect was not there solely to follow the wishes of the client, but to interpret and process them into a discourse that would meet with the approval of the majority." So in the 15th century, in the transition from the medieval social order to modern society based on the division of labor, absolutist power was reconfigured. In this time of upheaval, architects were faced with a new task, where the interests of the client met with the interests of the common good. So at the interface between the building and the public space, the architect's task was to legitimize political statement through architectural expression. It is therefore not surprising that the pioneering ideas of Alberti and many of his contemporaries were initially expressed mainly in the medium of the facade. Depending on the political agenda, they use the rhetoric of intimidation, impression, or persuasion to convey the balance of power to society. This development brought the profession into an inescapable dilemma. The moment architects reinvented themselves as thinkers, they put themselves on par with the ideology of power, interpreted through architecture. In other words, from that point on, architects, too, could be held intellectually responsible for the political system they serve, and could no longer retreat to the position of the craftsman who only carries out what others have conceived. Ever since then, architects have been unable to escape this contradiction, regardless of the clients they serve with their discourses, even in our times when catering to such an abstract power as capital. It is this political setting of architecture that causes great concerns among the younger generation of architects, those Matthias listened to. They don't want architecture to be bearers of meaning and ideology anymore, but a tool for change. But how do we escape the fact that architecture is a manifestation of ideological, political, economic, cultural, and social agendas, not least in the sense of the reification of capitalist society based on the division of labor, as the philosopher Wolfgang Schepper tirelessly points out. How do we escape the fact that architecture can be seen as an expression of the respective systems of power and production? Following John Ruskin's observation of two effigies of the Venetian doges Andrea Ventramin and Tommaso Mocenigo, Schepper elaborates in the forthcoming issue on the monumental shift in the ethos of craftsmanship between 1423 and 1495, with the latter being part of a representational regime that emphasized the visible image over the substance. So what we see here, we ask a photographer to go to these two effigies and make photographs to see what Ruskin saw in 1849 when he went to Venice, and at that time he was 30 years old. And when he arrived at the church and asked for a ladder to go up to these two tombs to see the effigies, from face to face, so to say, he discovered that the older effigy of Tommaso Mocenigo was totally worked out, but the other one Andrea Ventramin was just only on the half where you could see him from below. So this is somehow an observation he made, and from that point on was building up a very interesting argument against, so to say, the division of labor and the upcoming capitalist society. But the question is further complicated today, where architecture has been elevated to a mere symbolic character, independent of any use value, architecture that functions as an abstract asset for global capital, just as the project we see here in London, which is not served as a home, but just for capital to invest in. In 1971, the philosopher Wolfgang Fritz Haug described this decoupling effect of use value from appearance in his book Critique of Commodity Aesthetics. I quote, "Henceforth, in all commodity production, a double reality is produced. First, the use value. Second, and more importantly, the appearance of use value. Within the system of selling and buying, the aesthetic illusion, that is, the commodity's promise of use value, enters the arena of an independent function in selling." End of quote. A similar process can be observed in the context of the facade. Just as the appearance of a commodity detaches itself from the commodity and becomes an independent function in selling, as Haug put it, we can also observe the detachment of the facade from the building behind it. It is the facades, above all, which are competing in the face of globalization and digitalization, and which are shaping social discourses with their mass distribution. Fabiola Fiocco and Giulia Pistono called the intensification of this phenomenon digital consumption. It is not primarily about their architectural use, houses you live in, restaurants you dine in, museums you visit, but about their visual qualities. It is about the image of them and the role these play in the representation of lifestyles that are popular in social media. In other words, in late modernity, the aesthetic appearance or the promise of use value, that is the facade, not only detaches itself from the commodity, the building that is used, but itself becomes a commodity, the image that is digitally consumed. The facade can therefore no longer be reduced to the outside of the building. With the far-reaching access of social media and digital platforms, the principle of the visible penetrates even into the most private areas of life, eroding the distinction between public and private spaces and social roles. Everything is a stage. Every action is a performance. The production and consumption of architectural images have long since reached economically influential dimensions. Whether the implementation of a major project is successful depends not least on the success of its advertising images. The rendering of the Elbphilharmonie, so the Elbe Philharmonic Hall in Hamburg by Herzog and de Meuron, for example, was presented in the media years in advance, becoming in the process a political instrument that reversed the relationship between object and the image. Reality must measure itself against the digital model. This process has long since led to uncanny derealization of reality, particularly in large-scale international projects, as architecture critic Simon Brott notes. One could say that the world has become an image, and that this image is always rationally superimposed on reality. Architecture can therefore no longer be reduced to the physical space alone, but must also take its digital twin into account. The image has taken on a life of its own and become entrenched in the process. Contrary to the talk of their ephemeral and immaterial quality, images are what lasts longest and have the farthest reach. It is, in effect, the hardest currency of our time, considering the astronomical prices of NFT artworks recently, you see on the right. So what insights can we expect to gain from this reflection? That the battle for attention is raging globally with local impacts. That images can exert concrete and diffuse violence. That facades in our cities can shape social discourses. And that in this battle, questions of representation, identity, and participation usually fall by the wayside. But it is also clear that there will be no return to pre-digital times, at least not at the price of regression. The task for the future, therefore, is to give the unregulated public space of the internet a visual aesthetic order, as an Arc Plus fellow, Michel Kessler, puts it. We must empower ourselves to, quote, communicate with species from the realm of artificial intelligence, the cyborgs, chimeras, mutants, and bots, to tame them, even to climb behind the facades, and to speak from within them with synthetic tongues, as Kessler writes. In other words, like Alberti in the 15th century, we must raise ourselves discursively to eye level with the ruling powers of our times, which are already making the mark on everyday life in the form of codes and algorithms. Well, we already know the price we have to pay, because to put us on par with today's systemic powers through architecture means that we are once again held intellectually responsible and can no longer retreat to the position that we are only carrying out what the algorithms tells us to do. This is the responsibility of architects in the 21st century. To recap, elevating architecture to the status of political language has made architects responsible for many calamities of our times. It is understandable that some young architects don't want to bear this responsibility anymore. They want to, in a sense, to reverse the development that started in the 15th century when architects raise themselves discursively to eye level with the ruling powers. They want to change side and become the caretaker of the people. It is in this context that we have observed a rise in alternative practices in recent decades. So one of the issues we did on the commoning in the last few years, and also an exhibition on the same theme. It is also in this context that we have discussed the renewed interest in participation and commoning as a direct form of being political again. This is a debate which I cannot touch upon in the context of this symposium. So to close, I'd rather ask, how do we come from here to a renewed understanding of architecture as politics? How can we activate the political agency of the profession again? In order to get to the core of this question, I suggest to look at the housing question as one of the most pressing issues of our societies today. You see here the latest issue on housing in Vienna. Politicians and architects respond to this question, the housing question, by repeating the modernist approach that has failed us for the last century, building more and more of the monofunctional architectures of living and working that have devastated our cities. It is time to question the political and economic, the habitual and cultural, hierarchical and gender-specific relationships embedded in these architectures. Or, as the philosopher Luca Molinari puts it, the struggle, quote, the struggle against women's application to care for housing and the family, the struggle against exploitative housework and alienated reproduction must also imply a change in dwelling. And this begins with a different architecture, end of quote. Here, Schwarte takes architecture to task for social change, a claim that the profession itself has mostly given up, as it seems. Didn't Friedrich Engels already say, with regard to the housing question, that the social question could be answered neither architecturally nor urbanistically, but only by overthrowing the prevailing conditions? All too often, Engels' polemic was used against architecture, which was, in his eye, only suitable for bourgeois reformism. In this respect, it is remarkable that a philosopher like Schwarte, of all people, reminds architects of their agency. After all, it depends on what one means by overthrowing the prevailing conditions in order to determine the role that architecture could play in this revolution. Well, Engels, a professional revolutionary, understands the solution of the social question as the abolition of the capitalist mode of production. According to this logic, the social revolution can only be approached in the sphere of production. This view makes Engels operationally blind to the sphere of reproduction, which, although it takes place outside of the immediate relationship between labor and capital, is a prerequisite for the functioning of the capitalist system. the privatization and domestication of unpaid housework, unpaid reproductive labor, mostly at the expense of women, ultimately allows for the externalization of costs under capitalism. Feminist Marxists have pointed out this flaw in Marx's economic analysis since the 1970s. And in doing so, they have turned the critique of capitalism upside down and have shown architecture a way to be a social agent, despite the pending political revolution, which might even never come. So it would be too short-sighted, however, if we were to take this apt critique and, in a classic socialist fashion, transfer the organizational form of labor to the field of care work and socialize it in form of communal kitchens and other collective facilities. At best, this could be a cosmetic response to existing gendered power relations. Instead, the conclusion must be, if the separation of labor, that is production, and housing, that is reproduction, is a prerequisite for the capitalist mode of production, architecture can only contribute to profound social change beyond superficial improvement of housing conditions and facades by eliminating this separation. It must end housing in the form in which we have practiced it as an exclusionary typology since the beginning of modernity. It must understand housing as a social and thus urban function. In this reading, architecture itself can provide an answer to one of the fundamental political questions of our time, namely, by leaving behind thinking in fixed functions. And we see here the Atelier House by Werner Neuwirth in Vienna, where there is no programming at all, and each space allows for different scenarios. So it should be noted that this is not intended, this argument is not intended to advocate to the fiction of an autonomy of architecture. On the contrary, it is about the liberation of space from its typological imprisonment. In other words, it is about the defunctionalization of life. Or to quote Ludger Schwarte again, and to return to the initial question of the symposium about the future perspective of architecture, quote, future architecture should no longer make it its task to define and enforce social roles and functions, but to liberate us from them, end of quote. In the literal sense, Engels unconsciously was not entirely wrong. The social question cannot indeed be answered with more or better housing. If we continue to understand it, the housing, in the modern sense as a topology that serves exclusively social reproduction. Only when housing is absorbed into the production of the urban can the social revolution begin with housing. And that is, surprisingly, quite a political response that architecture has to offer. So to come back to Matthias wondering if we need to become caretaker in the future, I would say you could if you were to define politics purely as processes of caretaking. But if you believe in the political agency of architecture itself, there is still much room to maneuver. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Really very inspiring. And I give you the floor to Fernanda Di Maio. In the frame of sustainability survived through architecture. Fernanda Di Maio is full professor of design at the UAV, Faculty of Architecture of Venice. So, Fernanda, it's your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this invitation. Thank you to Matthias Sauerbruch and Louise Hutton. Thank you to Luca Molinari. Thank you to the M9. What's wrong? Okay. Well, I will speak in Italian, but I hope that you will understand through the slides some of the keywords I put. Okay. And so please, I beg your pardon, but I feel more comfortable speaking in Italian. And then if you need, I can give some explanation in English. Well, I will start this presentation from these words, Anthropocene or Man the Disturber. Che la si chiami Antropocene, secondo la definizione del premio Nobel Paul Crutzen, o nosfera, o era antropozoica, secondo la definizione dell'abate Stoppani nel 1873, è ormai opinione comune e condivisa da studiosi delle scienze fisiche e umane che quello che stiamo vivendo è un'era geologica fortemente condizionata dall'agire umano. Dunque potremmo dire che l'uomo è un agente geografico. So the man is a sort of geographical influencer. Questa constatazione non è una novità e la si può far risalire alla fine dell'Ottocento e al convergere dei punti di vista di due intellettuali che probabilmente non si conobbero mai, ma espressero più o meno negli stessi anni una consapevolezza molto sovrapponibile delle conseguenze dell'agire umano sul pianeta. E così George Perkins Marsh in Man and Nature in 1864 made a short subtitle to his book and said, "Our physical geography as modified by human action." Or William Morris in The Prospects of Architecture in Civilization in 1881 said, "Architecture is the molding and altering the human needs of the face of the earth itself, except in the outermost desert." E quindi se Marsh è lapidario, non meno penetrante e critica è la definizione ampia di architettura che fornisce William Morris, allorché afferma che essa rappresenta l'insieme appunto delle modifiche e delle alterazioni operate sulla superficie terrestre in vista delle necessità umane. È dunque evidente che fin dall'Ottocento esiste una chiara consapevolezza, there is a consciousness of the link, very direct, between the concept of architecture and the idea that we should take care of the environment. In altre parole, l'architettura si interessa delle modificazioni della superficie terrestre e questa è modificata dall'uomo che diventa appunto un nuovo agente geografico. Lampanti esempi di questa correlazione li si può rintracciare oltre che nelle miniere di potassio e nelle cave di marmo di Carrara, in cui l'automazione del lavoro sempre più spinta fa sì che processi che solo 20 anni fa richiedevano 15 giorni, oggi richiedono poche ore, anche nell'opera costruita, tipo il traforo del San Gottardo, di cui qui vediamo questa sorta di opening, this sort of satanic opening, nel giorno appunto della sua inaugurazione sul versante svizzero, o we can also see this very questo strettissimo rapporto all'interno di una ex base aerea militare in cemento armato in Gran Bretagna, in cui vengono fatte delle coltivazioni idroponiche. Ne consegue che il controllo e la sostenibilità delle modificazioni geografiche della superficie terrestre sono sempre più un compito architettonico, che questo è il concetto allargato e contemporaneo della nostra disciplina. So our discipline deals with this idea of sustainability. Ecco perché penso che la risposta, the answer to the questions of the title of my presentation, non è scontata. Sì, l'architettura ci aiuta non solo a sopravvivere, ma anche a rendere confortevole e sicura la nostra esistenza su questo pianeta. D'altra parte, non possiamo sottacere il suo lato oscuro, ossia l'impatto che questo agire geografico, architettonico ha sull'ambiente. E per questo, benché mi piacerebbe parafrasare il titolo di una recente lezione di Paolo Antonelli sul potere del design, il design al potere, design in power, translating in architecture in power, I continue preferring, dopo oltre 70 anni, la parafrasi di un titolo di un celebre libro, A Book of Richard Neutra, e anche aggiungendovi un bel punto interrogativo. So to translate survival through design in survival through architecture. Io non sono un architetto come molti di voi. I'm not an architect like many of you. I mean, you come from very huge agency. You have, most of you are very successful architects. I'm only a very small architect in that I worked in a very small office in the south of Italy, because I came from Naples, in the south of Italy, and so I have a sort of strabic, no, gaze, no, because so I can speak of this, of the future of profession in a very eccentric way, in un modo molto eccentrico. And I define myself architect by chance, because it was for a sort of phobic, è stato per un problema fisico, psicologico, which I became architect, okay? Just to understand why I live so bad in some spaces. So I started to do my education, to have my education in architecture like a sort of therapy, of psychology therapy, I would say, okay? And so you can see here also that the two cities that I live in, Naples, where I live ordinarily during my family life, and Venice on the other side, are very much influenced by two of the 7 elements that are usually used by scientists to define the Anthropocene era. I mean, the use of new materials, which made Naples very famous as a city of waste, okay? So all over the world, when you see an image of Naples, very often you see rubbish along the street. And on the other side, Venice, which is a model, a model also of sustainability. In the last years, Venice became the capital of the sustainability in the world. Well, this city is very much influenced in its ordinary life by the global warming and the climate change, which produced as a fact the exceptional high tide. Da entrambe queste posizioni e da entrambe queste città, so from both these cities, il rapporto con il contesto e con l'ambiente ha evidenziato l'urgenza di riflettere sul futuro della professione sia in termini operativi che in termini di educazione a un mestiere, a partire proprio da questi temi emergenti nel campo della sostenibilità che fanno dell'uomo architetto un agente geografico. D'altra parte, il numero degli architetti in Italia, number of architects in Italy, is so huge that seems to prove this definition of the architect as a geographical agent. Dai dati relativi agli iscritti agli ordini professionali aggiornati pochi anni fa, risulta che ci sarebbero 2,5 architetti ogni 1000 abitanti, il più alto in Europa. So we have 2.5 architects for each 1,000 citizens. This is the higher number in Europe. Se guardiamo però a quelli effettivamente attivi, who are the architects who really are engaged in the profession, allora scopriamo che questo dato scende a 1,5 architetti ogni 1000 abitanti. It means that almost one is like me, ossia è una sorta di consulente, is an advisor inside some specific investment which deals with the transformation of the territories. Ma se poi consideriamo in Italy, if we consider in Italy all the professions that are engaged in the work of buildings, engineers, geometry, we arrived to the number of one of these for 170 citizens. So it's really huge, no? But if we look at how they earn money from this work, then day we can be more tranquilli, no? Perché guadagnano molto poco. Ok? So we can understand that nonostante il densissimo patrimonio costruito e nonostante il grandissimo numero di persone che dovrebbero progettare, in realtà l'impatto, the impact of architecture in Italy is very low. Ok? Questo mi porta a chiedere per l'Italia una legge per l'architettura. I think we need in Italy of a law of architecture, a law for architecture. I think it's very important, very urgent, okay? And this is important non tanto per proteggere gli interessi corporativi, ma but to focus the needs. We have to be conscious in relation with the responsibilities of the architects for the planets. Ok? E noi non possiamo sottrarci a questo. E se le cose stanno così, in futuro saremo più simili all'architetto raffigurato da Mario Sironi come uno ieratico chierico, o più vicini allo scanzonato e verde, green, self-portrait che fanno di se stessi il gruppo A12 in una mostra di qualche anno fa curata proprio da Luca Molinari. E qual è la sensibilità, which is the sensitivity, the feelings of the young architect with now face with the profession? E quindi vorrei partire dalla mia città di elezione, da Venezia, presentandovi due tesi, two dissertations that were just discussed in this week in two commissions where I was one of the members. Non si tratta di tesi che parlano dell'acqua, della laguna o dell'alta marea. Are not thesis that speaks of high tide or water, but both this group of students were in Venice, like me and some of you, during the exceptional high tide of the November 2019. During that night in November, 3 months before the high tide. So I think that these theses were very much influenced by this event. La prima tesi è una tesi che si chiama In viaggio sulle Alpi, uno sguardo al futuro della montagna nell'epoca della crisi climatica. E mostra 100 skiing impianti, com'è che si dice, Luca? Ok, thank you very much, Ludovico. Nelle Alpi italiane. And the second one, invece, ha un titolo che è Quanto è sostenibile la sostenibilità? Un manuale di opportunità illimitate con risorse limitate. So the second one is made by you have students, but he's from German. So it's a Dutch student, but studying in Italy. Queste sono le 3 domande che questa tesi fa. E le potete leggere voi stessi. È una tesi molto ambiziosa, quella di Adam Mark Flieger, e vorrei approfondire con voi questa seconda tesi proprio perché ha obiettivi alti come la reinterpretazione di tecniche costruttive tradizionali nel contesto moderno per fornire alternative convenienti, circolari e veramente sostenibili alle nostre attuali opzioni abitative, ma anche l'obiettivo di comprendere l'economia circolare. So the circular economy enter inside the dissertation of the young architect. E come i progressi di queste moderne tecnologie dei processi industriali legati al nostro campo possono supportare questa sfida globale di cambiare un'economia lineare in una circolare. So here you can read because it's in English. I do not need to explain more. He studied in Italy, he's German, but lived in Denmark. So this amount of, this list of the scarcity resource is made considering the Denmark. And then also this idea of materia prima, and to start from the material that we already have. So to reuse, this idea of reusing the material. Io credo che entrambe queste tesi siano importanti, quella sull'ambiente montano e anche questa sul senso della sostenibilità in architettura, perché chiariscono che per le più giovani generazioni, quelle che si affacciano oggi alla professione, è già in atto un approccio al mestiere connotato dall'urgenza di porre in maniera criticamente rilevante gli enunciati, the statement, che riguardano un nuovo tipo di impegno, di engagement in our profession, non più basato in a sort of mannerism of the modern, quale quello che most of us used to practice in Europe and in the west side of the world, even when it is hidden under the idea of sustainability. Si tratta per loro di costruire percorsi di ricerca attraverso i progetti. Ricerca non tanto sulle mere forme e figure dell'architettura, not only forms and figures of architecture, this comes then, but to the context, in the context where it is necessary to work, or on the materials. È una ricerca per un approccio al progetto che già prevede e contenga nel suo disegno l'idea dello smontaggio, disassembly, affinché lo scarto possa essere riassemblato in nuove forme. Sembrano un po' antichi, all things that come back. Tipo, non so, le ricerche di Waxman, di Mr. Fuller, ricerche già note, se pensiamo anche al recente padiglione italiano per la fiera di Dubai, ma in qualche modo dotate di una nuova energia, perché frutto di una nuova concezione di che cos'è la materia prima nel campo dell'architettura, immediatamente dopo il mondo delle idee. E con notevoli slittamenti di senso, there is a huge slip nature is other artificial material. Vedere la città. There is no city. Ora io ho bisogno di ritornare, brevemente, perché la città che è fatta di molti strati, Naples is a palimpsest, 2000 cities. E recupero qui due piccoli progetti che non sono un vero successo dal mio punto di vista, benché abbia partecipato a questi progetti. When we speak of the future of the architectural profession, we should also think not only to the big agency, but also to the small, to the normal architect that have to deal with very ordinary problems, which are political problems or are sociological problems or things like that. I mean, today we are in an amazing building, no? You won through an international competition and you have a very good curriculum and things like that. And you also were lucky to win. Probably you were the best. I'm sure of that. But we need also of some fortuna, we call it in Italian. So sometimes. Allora, qui vedete questo ponte Don Bosco, before the intervention and after the intervention. So a very small project, which is near a very famous monument in Naples, the Real Albergo dei Poveri, designed by Ferdinando Fuga, one of the Napolitan illuminati. It was contemporary of the French architect classicism, gli architetti rivoluzionari and so on. So, lui, the place where we can renovate this bridge. Il ponte stesso e tutta quest'area sono aree fatte di scarti. Are all rubbish, okay? The bridge, all the buildings which are around it. E quindi abbiamo fatto un gesto molto semplice. L'ingegnere ha disegnato questo nuovo arco più grande, and then me as architect, together with another colleague, we designed all the rifiniture, tutto il sistema urbano, all the system, to create a sort of small square, to put trees, the staircase, to connect l'estradosso of the bridge with the intradosso, and also to connect the engineer work with the architecture, but also with the art of Mariangela Levita, a Neapolitan artist who drew for us this concept per coprire il cemento armato precompattato di questo ponte. And then another project dove ho fatto molta fatica a farmi riconoscere come architetto, perché era un altro progetto infrastrutturale, un progetto di strada. E in the competition there were a lot of description about architecture and landscape, but they never mentioned the architect as one of the coordinator of the project. They think to engineer for infrastructure, but not architect. So it was only because the engineer for the streets, for the flussi, asked me, but what I should do with this landscape or with these problems of, I don't know, other elements that I can give sort of advice. Okay? So, only few, poche immagini del cantiere che hanno significato piantare 516 nuovi alberi, 516 new trees, and 133 Washingtonie that should be higher than 8 meters. So we have to find it all around Europe, a place that can still has 133 palms Washingtonie that should be higher than 8 meters because they won't not change the systems of the fili della filobus. We propose them to do it like in many of the Netherlands cities or I don't know, Germany, but no, they want to have the fili. And so this is. So some images where you can see that architecture is almost nothing, but it is just to underline that through this line of very high trees, we try to compose a sort of order which can allow the gaze to focus on sulla montagna del Colle di Sant'Elmo, where there is the fortress, or on the opposite side, looking at the Vesuvio. Il cantiere è ancora in corso. Well, the works are going on. And I don't know how it will finish and how it will finish, will be completed. Ma per concludere e per ritornare alla necessità di una legge sull'architettura in Italia, concludo con questo disegno. This is a wonderful drawings made by Stefania Filospeziale. She was one of the best architects of the modern in Naples in the last century. This is the competition for the railway station in Naples, 1954. Parallelo 41 was the name of this competition. Stefania, we have lot of buildings designed by Stefania Filospeziale, but we do not have anything of her archive because she burnt her archive. Many people said that Stefania Filospeziale burned her archive because one of the most contested of her buildings, the skyscrapers of Società Cattolica, the first skyscraper in Naples, was used by Francesco Rosi in the very well-known film movie Le mani sulla città, who won La Palma d'Oro at Cannes in 1963. But the real reason for us that were friends of Stefania Filo-Speziale, we know that one of the reasons why she condemned her to this sort of damnatio memoriae was her very difficult relation with his son. And so she decided that if she cannot be a good mother, she won't be ricordata come un bravo architetto. And this is the reason. So there is also a very urgent problem of gender in architecture also, why I'm asking you to think very, very serious to a law for architecture in Italy. Thank you very much.
Grazie, Fernanda. Thank you so much, Fernanda, for bridging English and Italian, and then it was perfect. Absolutely was perfect. So I give the word to Gundula Rakowitz. She's the associate professor in the Faculty of Architecture in Naples, in Venice, I'm sorry, with the title Future Architecture Footprints. There's a break. Are you sure? Okay, there's a break. Since we are late, okay, we need a break. Okay, need it. Okay, do you need a break? Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. We are all human beings, even though we are architects. Okay, so I give you the break. And how much, Livio? Quanto?
15 minutes.
10 minutes. So they became 15 minutes. Okay, 10 minutes break. See you then. Okay, I think we can start. So I give you the floor to Gundula Rakowitz. Ciao, Gundula. Professor of Architecture and Design in the Faculty of Architecture in Venice, Europe. And the title is Future Architecture Footprints.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you very much to Luca Molinari and to Luisa and Matthias to be invited here. Also to Livio. And it's the first time I'm speaking here in MNO, so I'm a little bit emotional, and I apologize for my English, which is not the best. But I try with English, and oh, there had been something wrong with the presentation. Maybe it's better to do the PDF, because there is I have to do the PDF because I saw that here is the PDF. So, okay. Where is the full screen? Okay, Vista. Okay, that's it. So the title of my communication is Future Architecture Footprints. And I also like very much the title of this symposium, Draw, Build. But I transformed it not in the state of being, but in the being, in the acting, in the continuous form. And I put them like drawing, loving, building, loving, drawing, building, and so on. You can change the order of the word. And in this sense, also, I structured this presentation in 3 parts. I will talk quickly about the didactics, then passing to my research, and then the profession. I don't have a big studio atelier of architecture, as also Fernanda told before. But I think the union about and the relation about research, didactic, and profession can be an answer for the approach for the future of the architects. So the beginnings is about my experiments I do in the design studio 1 with the students of the first year. They're doing these experiments with me and with my group of teachers for 1 year. And I do have about 16, 17, 18 students. And I stress the word in this part of loving. The students have to fall in love with the architecture. And this is important for me. And I am teaching theories and techniques of architectural design. So I quickly only want to show the exhibitions I do every year with my students in the end. For several years, you will see the examples. And for example, here, it was some years ago, the students have not only to present their works separately, but they have to show them in a structure, in an exhibition. And so they learn to also to deal with this kind of composition and project. So I go on quite quickly. We have worked about several items, several areas. Here we worked in the periphery of of Venice and in the Veneto, and the aim was to approach the problem of Wunderkammer. Then we also aimed, this was in another year, the basic of this exhibition was not anymore rectangular, but it's a cross. And we worked on theater, Teatro del Mondo, Rischikabine, and we are working in the metropolitan area of Venice. And here another year again, we worked also in some areas with the item about Teatro Mundi and about the Museum of Teatro Mundi in Veneto area. You see another kind. Here the bus was not a rectangle, not a cross, but it was inside also already a little theater. And now this year we worked about the scenographic effect and the scenographic item of Venice. And you see we are working a lot with models, with all kind of models, with all kind of materials, also of course drawings, but the students are getting inside in the first year this kind of material. And so in a certain period of the laboratory, we make a step back and we are doing concrete models. And so they have to do an abstraction approach to do this item of Wunderkammer, of Teatro del Mondo, etc. And you see now very quickly some of these models in and they're always students of the first year. Very different approaches, more geometrical or maybe more organical projects. Depends, of course, every case is different, every area is different, every student is different. And this was the verb loving, now building, loving, drawing. Of course, the shadow is from us very important as for everyone, and they learn to compose the shadow, you know, and to project the shadow. And the second part of my communication is about my research. Here I only show 4 panels from my last research. I participate with a group of architects with Eleonora Mantese, Alessandro Mosetti and Carlotta Torricelli. We were invited by the Cooper Union at New York to participate at the exhibition of Venice Masked 2021. And there was the word drawing. We had to send the panels, and we had to reflect, we have to think about the future of Venice. And in the same time, while we work on Venice, we're working on Berlin. So in the end, we decided to send both projects, one for Berlin and the one for Venice. And they liked it, they took both of them. And so this is the project with the title Living Berlin for Venice, in the air and in the water, as we think that Berlin is a city of air. And using this panel, that in this project, that we deal with the ancient axis, with the Baroque axis of the Herzallee, we are which is from Charlottenburg to the Fasanerie, to the Zoologischen Garten. But Matthias and Luisa know it better than me. And we are doing this assemblage, this montage with some of our mental examples as Linné, as the Smithson, at Peter Handke, and so on. And here is, it was a quite quick project, but we tried to do an answer for this city, but it was important to transform and to meet the Venetian time and transforming it in Berlin time. And the second project was called Living Cryptic Venice, in the water and in the air. And we think, of course, Venice is a city of the water, and this is the problem of water, as also Fernanda told before me. And we tried to deal this problem with a provocating project, going in the underground, because one of the problems is to solve the situation of San Marco, St. Mark's Square. And we see here a panel which is full of different scales, because we have a multi-scale approach, but not in succession, but is simultaneous, contemporary. We are working on St. Mark's Square, thinking about the ancient centurias. We are thinking about the three Medusas, the channels which are coming in the lagoon of Venice, but we are thinking in the same time of Fischer von Erlach and the Cisterne for Istanbul, and the relationship between Byzantium and Venice. And so we are also thinking about Venusia, about Fellini, about the divinity which is coming out of the water, but we want to resolve this problem. And here you see quite quickly the provocation we did to do a underground St. Mark's Square, and it's full of a Sale Hypostyle, full of golden columns, which geometries are taking from the geometrical and centurial science. They have different dimensions. They have different bases, and they are coming out of this mat, of this ground, and there is the Sacra Roccia, where is coming out, growing out the San Basilica. So this was from didactic to the research. Now I want to go into an example of my profession. I did have the fortune to do this project with Gianluca Polisalo. It was the project for the new getaway in Padua East, and we did it with U of Studio Progetti and the Studio of Engineering Studio, Studio Tecnico Associato of Padua. And I called it as a getaway bridge. And for this, I want to introduce this project with the words of Georg Simmel, with the words in his essay Brücke und Tür, Bridge and Door, as I think he's one of the thinkers which can give new answers for the contemporary architecture and for the future. Simmel writes, by choosing two items from the undisturbed store of natural things in order to designate them as separate, we have already related them to each other in our consciousness. We have emphasized those two together against whatever lies between them. So we see there is the problem to separate things which are related. In the same time, we can turn around the perspective, the point of view, and see them as a connection which is also related. And I think in this time where the sociality are very close, and especially after this period of coronavirus, we had to find new forms of connections. So here quickly you see the model we did for this project. It was a model not of the finalist step. So you see the project is an technological machine between architecture and engineering, and he's defining this new central part of infrastructural part of the motorway landscape. So it's a quite simple project. In the form of a T, you see there's the big metal wing, which is covering the boxes where the cars are going through. Then on the right side, towards the city of Padua, there are these walls, scenical walls, which are slowing down the speed of the cars in this direction. Oh, they are slowing down the cars when they go into the barrier. On the left side, you will see a long wall of nearly 100 meters of glass blocks, which should demonstrate the continuous movement and the speed that the cars will take. This is the realization, and you see this aerial view of the getaway, and with the exit and the entrance, it's only a problem of the point of view. And you see that this is becoming a central place hub in all the infrastructural system from Venice to Milan in this metropolitan area. These are some studies I did, some drawings I did, which during this phase of the designing, and I come with them to Policello, and we worked on these proposals. Here you see the walls are again touching the earth. Then afterwards we put them up, but they leave them a little bit in area. So this is the ground level of the final project. The section elevation, and you see all view during the construction, because it was quite difficult to leave the getaway open, as it's one of the great getaway, and of course you couldn't close them. So with this kind of system, of the system of Mero, you can construct the wing, the metal wing, in continuous. So a cross section, and also another view during the construction. You see this character of the very metal machine. And there were these 8 columns, these 4 couples of 2 columns, and they are growing up this construction. So construction does become a composition. There were less and now we are during the Halloween, so it's I like it, but we are going back to the white the cars were the persons over the pedestrian connections, but also the architecture and the science are producing this scenography. But it's also very important to see this project in the night. You know, when you pass through this barrier, and it's wonderful to see how the artificial illumination in the wings are becoming like stars, yeah, and you're illuminating this part, this passage, you know, and also from the other side, when you are going not so fast with the car, and you are accompanied by this long 100-meter long glass wall. Transparent, but not much transparent. And this this shining character, this character of stars, made me wrote a wonderful text about Paul Scherbart, Das neue Leben, architektonische Apokalypse, the new life and architectural apocalypse, and I want to read it some sentences for you, because I think, or I thought about this essay when I project this project. Scherbart wrote, "Slowly the old terrestrial globe turns around the old sun that no longer glows and brights as before. Silent night is everywhere. But the stars sparkle so bright as before, probably brighter as they are larger. Golden stars they are. Yet in the velvet black sky it comes alive. The great archangels come. In the beginning, each archangel takes the large cathedral they carried under their arm into both hands and set it on the high snow range. From the backpacks, the angels break out many hundred shiny new sparks, the palaces. They decorate the large snowballs that calls itself Earth, making it colorful and powerfully radiant. At the same time, the eyes of Archangel shine as if presenting toys to children. The earth looks colorful, as it were strewn with the wings of the most precious butterflies, frozen bursts of paradise and clamming diamonds." And these words will bring me to the very last part of this communication. It's a project called Libellula, Dragonfly, which was growing up together with the project of the Getaway of Padua. And but in a certain point, the wings of this dragonfly was cut, and we didn't realize it. But it was a part, so I want to show it to you. But for showing this project, I want to start in the ancient footprints of the mental background I had in this period. And I want to show you the Fontana dei Quattro Fiumi, the fountain for the four rivers in Piazza Navona in Roma, where Bernini put together the ancient obelisk, the perfect sign nail of the world, together with these rocks and these stones in irregular form, in an irregular way. And how can we put together two different times in a new place? And how can we construct this new place? No, and in the same times, I remember the sketch of Polisello, Le colonne con la testa nelle nuvole. And you see that here in this sketch, Polisello shows a system of pillars which are taken together by this kind of cloud. Yeah, so the with the head in the clouds, with this irregular form, which is taken together the regular system, and studying Bernini, I found also these sketches. He did a lot of sketches. He did for the perforated base for the obelisk, and I turned it round upside down, and so I tried to look it from another point of view, and so the rocks of Bernini are becoming the clouds of Policello, and turning around to the one of Policello, the clouds of Policello are becoming the rocks and the stones of Bernini. It's always the same, to put together something irregular with something irregular. It's a problem which hasn't time. No, it's a fortune that we have architects. We can deal with that, and this maybe is also some influence from my background, as I come from Vienna. So I obviously confronted myself with the method of the dodecaphonia or the Schoenberg-Webern, etc. And so they can write their music and compose the music from the left to the right and from the right to the left. And they also can write it and compose it from the upper to the back and from the down to the upper. And so this is important to say, okay, we can try now, we architects also for the future, to think about some problems with the other point of the view. Speak about clouds, about here artificial clouds. These are taken by airplanes. This because there are special airplanes, seaplanes, airplanes which can swim and fly. Because the libello, the dragonfly, chose a new place in the Venice lagoon, and it found a place at the Hidroscalo, at the island of Le Vignole in the past. That was a place where the seaplanes start and come, and well, not a long time, but it was used, and so we chose this place, and it should also sign one of the entrances of this lagoon, of this Medusa. It's the biggest entrance in the next to the Bocca di Porto di Lido in the Venetian lagoon. And there's Forte Sant'Andrea di Sansovino, and there is also our new new dragonfly. And for this, I did a lot of sketches. Now I show only a little part of it. And I went with this sketch always to Policello, and he always said, no, it's not good enough, and try again. And I tried again. And then once he did these sketches, there are really little few sketches, too, he did. And he said, no, you have to move the wings. And so I tried to move the wings with other drawings. We are here in the drawing area, and I tried to undulate these wings of the dragonfly, but it was not good enough. And I tried another variation. There are variations, and we put the wings up, and they are erected by columns of different dimension. You see at the ending, and there was this trying also these tentatives with how to color these wings, And I tried to do this. Then there was this important drawing by Policello, Altitudo Incertitudo, and that's it. The project is all inside here. And so I go on with defining the final drawings for the project till I go to this designing for this drawing to for the construction for the model with the exact dimension. And when I brought this drawing to Policello, he started again to draw on it. You see it on the right down. Some solutions for the getaway in Padua, because the libellula should grow up there, but then they cut us the wheels. You know, where he was speaking about Erasmus di Rotterdam, about Hieronymus Bosch, about the colors of the structure and so on. So we'll see again the model. You see this dragonfly is connected with a line which is coming from a world where we don't know where it's coming. It can be all and nothing, and this is only the model, but it's existing for us. It's existing the project. You see 3 of these 4 wheels are made of metal material, and the 4th wheel is made of glass, a gray blue glass. The escalations are in red. There are also the stairs, which is arriving to the platform. There is nothing in this project, you see, and it was an architecture which can connote this lagoon landscape. It's quite simple, and I wish to conclude by paraphrasing the words of Daniel Bahnberg in his last book, Music Awakes Time. If I try to talk about the future of architectural profession, it's because the impossible has always attracted me more than the difficult. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gundula. And now I give you the floor to the last lecturer of this morning, Dirk van Heuvel, with a very inspiring title, Finding Poetry. Dirk van Heuvel is an associate professor at TU Delft and the head of the Jaap Bakema Study Center in Rotterdam. So, Dirk, it's your time.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for organizing this event and inviting me. I really would like to also recognize it's a special moment, right? To be here after the lockdowns. In Holland, the numbers go up again, so I also feel a bit like we're in between something else. But also, I only could have a very quick look at your building project, and it's quite amazing, and I'm very happy to be here. And I realized it already with the preparations for the exhibition and the book. This is a special moment for you and the office. And once again, thank you for making me part of this event. It made me very conscious about what to bring to this event. An event that's called The Future of the Profession of the Architect. And I am not a practicing architect. I'm trained as an architect. So this is my first moment of doubt. We talked about it a little bit. What I can say about it also is the moment I decided to go back to academia and to do PhD research with Max Rieselada, my old professor. This was also the moment of Super Dutch. Some of you might remember it. And this was for me as a Dutch person, also someone who worked with the Office of Neutelings. So I was a little bit familiar with the phenomenon. But it was not a nice moment, at least not for me. I liked some of the buildings that were then celebrated, like the NVRDV project for Hanover, for instance. But what happened in terms of thinking and criticism, the Super Dutch moment really marked the moment when architectural criticism, at least in the Netherlands, was replaced by marketing and branding. And I didn't really feel happy then about that. So I moved into the archive, and I will bring the perspective of the archive. Now, history is not history to me. It's maybe a bit strange to talk about history in an event devoted to the future, but I would like to see history or the archive also as the place that holds seeds for future thinking. And it's an open process, in that sense, an open instrument or machine or apparatus, the archive, and I will explain a little bit about that too. Now, the other moment of doubt was related to the question to write something for your book, The Turn of the Century, which came with the question to reflect on that moment of the turn of the century, also going back to the 1990s, the moment that the wall in Berlin had come down, Cold War was over, and where we are today. And this was in the midst of the pandemic, of course, and it was also post-Brexit, with the American elections raging on and all the horror of the media clickbait events. And I was thinking, what can I say about the turn of the century? Because the 90s was so optimistic, at least for me. And now where are we today? What did we do? How did we end up here? I'm not going to go into a big political analysis, but the reason to look into poetry and finding poetry is related to one of my core expertise. I think the work of the Smithsons. This is an image from the Smithson work, of course. And one of the things they stated, this is also funny, when I started to look into the Smithsons, brutalism was not popular at all. In England, when you would come to England and you would say that you were looking into the work of the Smithsons, people were a bit surprised. But brutalism now is very popular. But just to remind us ourselves of what brutalism, well, one of the slogans was, of course, brutalism tries to face up to a mass production society and drag a rough poetry out of the confused and powerful forces which are at work. Fantastic quote, fantastic also to talk about a rough poetry. And this image shows or captures how to drag a rough poetry out of the wreckage after the war. This is Coventry, heavily bombed at the time, and the Smithsons projected their project for Gundula housing up of that wreckage and the ruins. This is what brutalism was about in those years, I think, at least for the Smithsons, or one of the things it was about. And then I considered how to drag a rough poetry out of the Trump election, the Brexit moment, etc. I felt really a bit desperate. So back to the archive again. The design for Coventry was in fact this cathedral design, 1952. And we came into second place, unfortunately. A mixture of a Neo-Palladian scheme with a very advanced concrete roof structure that was sitting on top of the ruins of Coventry. And I want to go to the Smithson's archive to talk about a little bit about how the archive may hold some seeds for the future. Some people know this place. It's in London. It's the Smithson House, Cato Lodge, Gilston Road, and a garden that was manicured carefully by Alison. The main entrance. when I want to go, this is some decorations. The photos are by Sandra Lusada, a friend of the Smithson family. And the decorations are made for the commemoration party for Peter Smithson, who died in 2003. The moment when I was working with Max Rieselada on an exhibition on their house designs for the Design Museum in London, together with, I forgot his name. I will come back to that. This is Alison and Peter Smithson's room. Here they are. This is a nice element. This is a curtain that, or a shade that Alison made with shards found on the Robin Hood Garden site. And of course, the lovely flower patterns of their clothes. Yeah. And I'd like to go to this room. This is Alison Smithson's room, where she had her archive. Tiny room at the back of the house with one window overlooking the garden. And you see how this room is packed with boxes from projects and publications, and how it's also carefully ordered into with these colored labels. It's all typed, also what's in there. And what happened at the time was that while Max and I were working on the exhibition, Peter died. And the children wanted us to continue the project. So all of a sudden the project got to be very special. And we were allowed to enter the house on our own. Because before, Peter Smithson would always be the guardian to this archive. And then you would sit in the reception room and you say, oh, I'm interested in House of the Future. And Peter would walk out slowly and then would come back with the box House of the Future, and that was it. But now, all of a sudden, we could see, you could say, behind the scenes of the archive and how the Smithsons organized the office that was also in their house. So, for instance, the projects that are finished were in red. The projects that were ongoing were still green. There was a special color for the project with their client in Germany, Axel Bruchhäuser of the furniture factory Tecta. So, yeah, boxes with slides of their travels, etc. I mean, incredibly well organized. I'm not like that at all, I must say. So, and Alison died in '93, and Peter still used that room to indeed continue, organizing the work and organizing publications. It's a working archive. Right? It's always in motion and it's dynamic and it's a tool and it's an instrument for PR reasons maybe, but also to rethink and reflect upon architecture production. And in one of the special boxes was, for instance, a silver box, the magic box. And when you would go through those files, you find all sorts of annotations by Peter, by Alison, and one of the interesting annotations to see was file magic box. What could that be? And in that magic box, there were all sorts of unfinished thoughts and ideas kept. So that was like one of the working tools for them to, well, not sure what to do with it yet, but it seems promising, or etc. For me, this magic box is like the archive itself. I will show you one other magic box that was not really a magic box, but this was this pile of, well, things in a carton box. And it's Alison's scrapbook. You might know this project from '53, the installation of Parallel of Life and Art the Smithsons made at the ICA together with Nigel Henderson and Paolozzi. Also Roy Jenkins, the engineer of behind the Hunstanton School, was involved. A vast array of images from all sorts of origins, X-ray images, biology, astrology, primitive art, I'm not going to. What we see here is, well, Nigel Henderson explains it in terms of André Malraux's Musée Imaginaire, a collection of images that is also almost like a cosmological index that talks or want to talk about the interrelation of all these various sectors and fields, and it is aimed to trigger associations. So the idea is not to explain and catalog each image, but each image is a cosmos of its own, and it's the interrelations are there to trigger associations. So it's a machine to trigger associations. It may be a memory machine, it may be a machine for speculation and creative thinking. Now, this is part of the image archive of Alison, and I'm just going to show you a few of those images. P.S. Love that brute, which is of course also funny because P.S. is Peter Smithson maybe. There are cars, there's Schinkel, somehow a map of Denmark ended up there, Berlin, the pyramids, cathedrals, castles. It's an architecture's image repository after all. Butterflies. Alison and Peter were very much interested in dress and how it is related to patterns of culture, patterns of communities and life. Masks. Teddy bears. Peter had a soft spot for teddy bears and even dressed up as a teddy bear. It's one of the many anecdotes when they dressed up for a party. Wuppertal, the Schwebebahn in Frankfurt. Transport, plastic, and other ceremonies and rituals and special places in cities. Industrialization next to religion or medieval cities. All looking in search of, that rough poetry, I would imagine. Now, as Luca mentioned, I divide my time between research and teaching in Delft and working in the new institute, the former Netherlands Architecture Institute in Rotterdam. And we hold a series of boxes from the Smithson archive there, the Team 10 papers. And plus we have some materials related through the connection between Smithson and Bakema. And one of the things that I thought to bring here is how already then a shift in thinking happened in related to ecology and environmental thinking. We made a little exhibition out of it by just using archival materials and presenting the archival materials not just to the audience but also to students and researchers, because the exhibition is also a research installation. And this so-called Dubrovnik scroll that the Smithsons put together was one of the key documents to work with that. So this is still within the SIAM discussions. SIAM would dissolve in 1959. And the topic of habitat was one of the most difficult topics that they wouldn't agree upon. 1956, this is almost like a manifesto that the Smithsons brought to the discussions. But to no avail, there won't be a SIAM habitat charter, etc. That's a bit of history I'm not wanted to show here. But they talk of all sorts of modern concepts, but also, let's say, system theory concepts related to habitats and related to existing ecology, and how the human habitat landscape and existing ecology are interrelated and should be considered as interrelated. This is also very much part of what Bakema proposes to architects in the Netherlands, or to SIAM, that architecture is indeed not about objects or autonomy, but is about the relationship between man and things. Now, what the whole problem of environment, right? Now, how that works out in architecture and architecture design is a completely open question, but to think of architecture as a discipline of relationship is really one of the shifts in post-war thinking, and it's important, I think, also for today in terms of ecology thinking, or maybe also in terms of the digital turn that everybody likes to talk about, or maybe also to think in terms of new economic systems. Now, some fragments of that funny piece of archival material we have. It's both a manifesto and it's again a thinking tool. So this is a reference to Patrick Geddes' clock tower. Of course, it talks about the different scales that you have to think about. What else is there? There's also Patrick Geddes' Valley section reference. And one of the projects they brought, for instance, was so here you see also this how to use images and how to bring images together as a tool to come up with new speculations, projections for design. From special Dutch painting on domestic life to military occupation in the Crimean War. And then a proposal for houses riding the landscape. Yeah, this is a funny, nice image that they bring to the same Congress. Now here's the exhibition. And basically we put all the materials of that exhibition in the one room. It's very dark because the originals have to be protected from light. This is one of the big difficulties when working with archives today in an institution and not the archives, let's say, in a private office. They are there for eternity. But yeah, that is, so preservation rules, light rules, etc. is super strict, and it's hard to bring materials out in what sort of conditions that you can actually work with them. So in a way, it was a whole presentation of all the grids of the 56 moment, discussing habitat, ecology, and environment. Also the grids that were not there in the archive anymore, but we knew from the names in the proceedings that there were presentations. So we also had, so an archive is a memory space, so it evolves, it is constructed, changes. An archive is not a static, fixed thing. And we had several seminars in this room too, looking at the materials, using materials, and going also into relationship with other projects in the archive. It's not that bad. This is a super big drawing. So I want to bring a few drawings too. It's Draw Love Bill. This is a student assistant to Aldo van Eyck and Cornelis van Eesteren. Cornelis van Eesteren was also a CM chairman and a professor of urban planning in Delft. And Aldo van Eyck, I assume you know him, the contrarian thinker, but also poetic thinker in architecture, key thinker of that period, famous for his orphanage, 59. And what Piotr Gongrijp did, so I'm now looking at, so I combined this idea of the habitat and ecology and environment with the Dutch delta and the Dutch landscape as a habitat. And in our archive, we have various items that go into this, and especially this person, Piotr Gongrijp, looked into the becoming of the Dutch landscape, the waterscape, the peat landscape, how it sits in the delta at the North Sea, how it works with also the infrastructures and the networks of the modern day society. So here we have Rotterdam, and it was all about enlarging the port, Rotterdam, Amsterdam, but also Hamburg and London here and Paris. So it sees the landscape and the environment also as a system. Another one of those drawings, and it's all about how human habitation has co-shaped, developed the Dutch landscape. Other unknown, this is one of the nice tricks. If you bring out everything from the archive, you see things that have been suppressed or forgotten. This is a Dutch architect, Romke de Vries, who looked into the Dutch specificities of this flat horizontal landscape, the dunes and the lakes, and how it's also agricultural. In relation to possible ways of occupying that landscape. This is one of his own houses, but also the son of Rietveld, for instance, Jan Rietveld. This is a drawing by Jaap Bakema, also talking about how to inhabit the Dutch polder landscape. And the nice thing of drawings is that the character of the person comes through. It's about densities and patterns again, and how to integrate old farmyards here, and then, yeah, try to develop different qualities through different densities. This is the classic Dutch infrastructural works for the struggle against the sea, the coastal area Zeeland, how to protect the Dutch delta landscape from storm and flooding, while using also new ways of marine cultures and food production, new leisure landscapes, integrating with new housing and nature, aiming for 2050. This was 89 when this drawing was made. You could say just before the neoliberal term was more dominant. And this is by Frits Palmboom, who was inspired by Piotr Gonk and also made a very close reading of the Dutch landscape, Alphen aan de Rijn, in the middle between Utrecht, Amsterdam, and Rotterdam, looking at the way the Dutch landscape is formed, what sort of special, spatial material qualities are there, how you move through it, what sort of patterns, and then he is one of the designers behind the latest extension in Amsterdam into the water, the Eiburg district, an archipelago. So it's a little bit like a lagoon, but not quite. And here you can see how Frits is so super different from Jaap Bakema with his wild sketching. Frits is very considerate and careful. And here you see the old Amsterdam city center, the docks of the 19th century, and then moving away from the motorway around the city into the waterscape. What was once the sea, the South Sea, as opposed to the North Sea, an inner sea that became an inner lake, with this very carefully layout of islands. No, that's what it's done. So going back as a last reminder of the archive and the Smithsons maybe. So how to work with the land, how to garden our environment, to think maybe of the architect as a gardener of our environment is, I think, very much also present in this project of the Smithsons. Their little funny or experimental house, the Upper Lawn Pavilion, which they also called the Solar Pavilion, talking about how they lived with the climate and the seasons in spring. So they also, especially Alison, would document living there, many photos in the archive, and together with Enrique Miralles, when Alison went to teach in Barcelona, they produced a beautiful book on the Upper Lawn Solar Pavilion. And basically, I put it also here to remind us that ecology is not only about technology, because so many ecological problems today and problems of sustainability are countered by technological solutions. It's also to remind us it's about creating really nice spaces with nature, which are also play spaces, clearly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I will invite all our friends to have a seat here, to have like 10 minutes, 10, not more, because then we have a break for lunch. Thank you so much for all your interventions. Eric and Gundula and Fernanda, please have a seat. I don't. Oh yeah, we missed one chair. Yes, sorry. I give you. No, I give you mine. No. Come on, no. It's well, we are as an actor. Sometimes we are not good in numbers. So, but no, we are all so much gentlemen that we are all standing now. Please, Fernanda, Gundula, have a seat. And now, well, the chair is coming. Chair is coming. Grazie. So since no, I put you on the yellow. No, so it's okay. Okay. That's good. So we keep just 10 minutes, and but I would like to remind some of my booklet, some of the key quote and contents coming out from all of you, because all of you brought a different point of view, which is perfect. I love it, since we are living in a complex and heterogeneous world, and which is something that we accept in 21st century, finally, not anymore a mono thinking, but so practice architecture is a way to resist to an easy consumption. So architecture is a way to work on quality and awareness. So material is a way to interpret something that is lasting somehow. And the idea of architecture as a political discourse, and in terms of, which I love very much, the idea of defunctionalizing life, which I think is one of the key turning elements, which will bring us far away from the 19th and 20th century greeds, mental greeds, which in a way is the result of the Enlightenment and the way of thinking of modern Western, I would say, thinking about the city as a product of functions. So and individuals as numbers, not anymore as a human being, which is one of the key arguments. And then going beyond the mannerism as a way to interpret. So the idea of using architecture as a way to doubt and to rethink gradually, which bring us to the idea of the words we are using, because we are still using old words representing changing contents, which is one of the tricky arguments, not today, because words being a product of cultural situation are changing in sense, but still sometimes we are using words with the old way of thinking. So it's always, and then words is the only way we share, and since we cannot share the same word with the same content, somehow this creates a real problem in terms also of politics, architects communities, for example. And university as the place for experimentation, the only probably today the only free place for experimentation, which is still very important to me. I think that today universities are the place where we can still experiment and stress very much contents, which I think is the center of your talk, and archives as open sea where we can lose and find poetry again. So archive is something alive. The good things of being historian that you can make a different question to the same paper every time, and this is fantastic, because why another book on Le Corbusier? Because do you have another point of view? And I think this is very important. And the way you showed the exhibition about Smithson was very much showing this idea of an open archive as a place, as a laboratory, as a workshop, as a process, which brings paper back to life. And this is also very important. All of you, in a way, has this idea of an active form of resistance, which is not passive at all, which is not nostalgic at all, but is another way of looking to the same things. So I would start from this point of view, the different way of looking to the same situation. I mean, in a way, it seems that there is only one way, in the hyper-capitalism way of approaching architecture. That's the way of production, of being efficient, of being a leader, whatever. But what I feel is an emerging of a different kind of attitude in relation to the role of architects and the way forms architecture, which I would come back also to this word form, which is a word which has been kind of untold things that for 20 years processes were killing forms. But finally, we are coming back to a reflection on forms and on the forms of architecture as one of the tools of a cultural. I think we should find another word instead of resistance, because resistance is always very passive. But so I would like to ask you, what is the sense of imagining forms as active tools in relation to reality, and the role of architects in defining new tools to reframe a deeply changing condition we are living? I know it's a hard work. It's somebody has. No, Dirk was the first one, the last one, so I would keep it. So, who want to start? Eric, would you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's good.
Well, I don't know what the underlying structural intent was of this, but what was completely mesmerizing for me in the end, that the exhibition upstairs represents, you know, in manifest form, probably 30 years. And actually, these contributions I found wonderful in terms of the architectural studio, which is a kind of the laying of a kind of a foundation for the intensity that one needs as an architect to proceed, and ends, you know, with this extraordinary poetics of an archive. So somehow you've structured in this morning's talk, for me, you know, a wonderful circular argument about, let's not call it, about form making, ultimately, yeah? Material and form making. So that's my sort of reflection on what I enjoyed hugely.
Well, in terms of form, let's just talk about how we use this building. And this morning I walked up the grand staircase, and the moment you step onto those shallow steps, you just have another kind of corporeal identity. You walk upright, and so I think if we think about form making, it always comes back to us as a way to use, and I think in relation to everything architects do is also in terms of what you have said in the end. I found it really touching, because we are working at the moment on an issue on the relationship of gender and architecture. And so it always has a corporeal reality to what well, we experience in the space. And so to, in a way, capture your question, what the form of form making has as a relevance, I think it should be from the perspective of the one who uses the space produced by architects, help them find a new attitude towards the world. So that's the first step of changing things. And just walk up a staircase and see what it makes to your feelings, and then just think beyond yourself. So that's the next step in terms of gender, in terms of other relations. I think one of the key notions in your talk was to think architecture relational again, and so also not only beyond ourselves and thinking with others, but also beyond the species of the human. And that's another aspect I would like to add in addition to what you talk about ecology, because the way we as human mammals kind of enclose ourselves within the environment is the main problem towards the ecological question. And if we somehow try to think also with other species that we are within a habitat surrounded by others, would help us also to think about new forms and about new way of form making and using these forms together with others.
Since you raise up the arguments on gender and architecture, which I think it's very important, and what do you think should be pushed from this point of view, this direction?
Well, for me, I would say something. I think that there is this question of gender, which is not only, well, for me as an architect and as a mother, and as it's very urgent in Italy, okay? But in some way, I would say that in relation to the form, probably it's indifferent. I mean, you can have form, you can have a different character in your approach to the form, but I do not think that it's really important, the gender, in shaping, in morphing, or things like that. It's more important in the approach you can have with the profession and with the future of the profession. For what concerns the forms in the future of profession, well, I think that all the intervention that we have listened to show us that we cannot avoid to start from the present and a lot from the past, from the form of the present. And also the buildings where we are now show us that only starting from some limits we have here around, we can then imagine exceptional, amazing buildings. And this is always, so for me, more than thinking on the future, I'm interested as architect in the form of present. Then I have a problem as a teacher, as a professor, because one of the things, one of the responsibility I have as a teacher is then to educate for the future. And it changes a little bit our paradigm, I would say, sometimes. So, for example, I appreciate very much not only all the intervention, all the lecture I have that were before mine, but also this approach that Gundula showed us, no? And I said we are two different approaches in the EU. We show two very different, no? More barricadera, me, and more poetic. She's a sort of poet, and it's also very important because this sort of poetic grew up also from the necessity for building the architecture. No? She asked her students to imagine these models as part of an infrastructure, no? Because there is the support, there is the box, the high box. So that's what I think I can say.
So Gundula, which is the role of poetic? Because I mean, because I feel that this word is rising up, and I think it's so important because it's also probably one of the way of looking different to reality, as you said, no? To be more to keep the position, being individual, looking with a certain kind of different sentimental attitude to reality, which means falling back in love with the reality. Falling back in love with the place you cross, and finding different ways of looking to places and to things. So talking about education, and I think that talking with I mean, one of the important things in the Faculty of Architecture is that we need to leave a free space to let the students bring something that we don't know still. I think this is very important. So instead of being too much which was one of the problems with the university before, to be too academic in terms of you you listen, I teach you. Then today the point is I leave the floor, I leave you empty space to bring me something that probably generationally speaking I don't know. So it's a meeting place instead of a teaching place. So which I think is one of the elements today that are more challenging. So what does it mean working with the student, leaving the free floor to work on a future way of looking to architecture?
It's always difficult. But as I finished my intervention with, I like to deal with the impossible. And so poetry for me is the thing to teach the students, and poetry is coming from the word poesis, fare, doing. And so I show what I'm doing, and I'm drawing with them, I'm loving with them, and I'm building with them. And this is important. And Fernanda knows this, as she presented a book from me at the Casablanca in Amalo, and she shows this these structures I did with the students, and we brought this project also in the museum, and have this approach with the real Wunderkammer of this artist. And on the other side, the problem of the form you talked before, Luca. I think it's important to think about the form as a material form, but the form also as an immaterial form. And this is also something I'm working on, I'm researching on. Then I liked a lot the cover, which you did on the magazine Arc Pew, with the building of Clorindo Testa. We have spoken of the political influence of the architecture, and this building is a great building. I've worked with Clorindo Testa 1 month for a competition and stayed in his house at Buenos Aires, and I know this building a lot. And it's a bank. And it was very difficult to understand his language. I'm coming out of a Cartesian approach, Polizello. And
which was good for you.
This was good. And he always said to us, Clorindo Testa, no, you have to go to the Paleolithic Museum in La Plata. You have to see the dinosauri. And so we are going to this museum, and in the evening dancing tango. And so we can approach this kind of language. And on the other hand, I liked a lot also the approach of the archive. I always worked a lot with the archive, and I used the archive as architect. And you see also in the project for Berlin, we assembled a piece of the Smithson, which did a wonderful project per Berlin. And the other side also, I liked very much the first intervention, where is the fascinated the poetry of construction. You see the detail of a facade is like a human body. And so I think these different approaches of this item you pone is interesting, very interesting for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Dirk, you raised that poetry, and then everybody was falling there. So how an archive can be political today? How an archive and an institution can be political?
It's of course always.
Yeah, I know.
Nature. Yeah. That's a question I didn't see coming. We are a national institute. We are a national heritage institute. So by nature, our collection is an index of power relations. So yeah, not so many women, I'm afraid. This is super white, etc. So we are developing a whole program on that with little projects, bigger projects. So we also try to develop counter narratives for that, and you have to open up an archive. You have to, of course, develop a sensitivity or a sensibility. What other stories are there behind the obvious, you could say. That's all. Yeah, so in that sense, your work as a curator is indeed very much as a caretaker. And so that's also where curation comes from. And to be aware of, even though you're working in a national institute, to be aware of that the archive, and then you go into Michel Foucault, etc., with how the archive is the repressive, blah, 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 its apparatus, etc. Of course, it's true. And then you have to think of, but then what can you do as an alternative, and how can you, make it more porous, make it more open? The one thing I wanted to also, because I like the question of form, which is the super architectural question.
Well, it's not only architecture,
but I like to, because I talked about finding poetry, and the aspect of finding is very important.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you never ever project something onto, because projection is also, of course, part of the human brain all the time. But the finding and the form finding comes from Sharon and Hugo Hering, and is a very interesting, different way of looking or conceptualizing architecture design. And so I know that Louisa and Matthias also like to think of their buildings as creatures, or I think he used the German word Wesen, which has also double meanings. But it's important that the form finding is related again to a process in which you try to understand in what sort of context you're operating, and what you can indeed drag out of the things that you come across. And it's a continuous, it's not a natural thing. So the idea of Henderson and the parallel of life and art, that is this natural creative process, value free maybe, it's not like that. There's always an assessment of this, I like this, I don't like that, I will foreground this, and I will, put that a little bit on the side. So sometimes it's in small gestures that you're political, sometimes in bigger gestures. And then what you just mentioned, how you as a human person's visitor then occupy the space and move through it. So I really like that comment, because it talks about how architecture can empower and can enable individuals or communities, to feel capable of navigating this difficult world. So
to welcome you. Yeah, please.
I just want to add a comment to what you told about Clorendo Testa, because form finding is, of course, not naively something which just happens, but it has a societal context. And the fact that a bank allow an architect to design this kind of facade indicates a tremendous change in how capital was realizing in society at that time. And the background was that the Bretton Woods decision to divert the gold standard from the money. And so the abstraction of money becomes even more abstract without the fixing with the gold standard, meant that banks don't have to be austere and secure institutions anymore, but they have to appeal to society in another way. And so form finding for this bank has a deeper running change in society and the capitalist society at that time.
I'm asking if there are any questions or comments from you, from all of you, because I mean it's not. So yes, please. Somebody should bring the. Oh, grazie, Gundula.
Thank you so much. All the guest speakers contribute those tremendously valuable opinions individually as expert in practice or archive. I'm just wondering, like each, sorry for my broken English, like someone is providing the opinion in finding poetry and some in the revolution in the architecture, like facade in the manifestation, and each one contribute as an individual. But while listening to the all the lectures, I think one question is I always have in mind is that like the ecosystem of the whole architectural profession all over the world has been discussed, and we talk a lot about the form finding in architecture itself, but is there like a question of form finding in the architectural profession, like how all the individual architect or their intellectual contribution can combine together and to rethink about the ecosystem, the form of the architectural profession itself.
Want to reply to that? Well, I think it's asking to the professionals, to the architects. Eric, would you? Or I give you?
No, he's fine.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't think it's, I think there's kind of danger in thinking about that in a universal sense. And I think that actually the cycles of contribution from schools of architecture particularly, and maybe the architectural profession in different territories is in its own archival way a fascinating topic. So I can't see that one needs to think about it universally, but I do think that in the light of a globalizing industry, which probably has been given a very important jolt with COVID, and actually the question of local expertise, local crafting, and the sense in which there is a responsibility not to shift materials all over the world, but actually, source in a sense, in a much more ecological sense, is a major shift that needs to be given a kind of political incentive to reinforce, I think, a kind of a term that has been used often, but a kind of critical regionalism, a sort of sense of referring much more to a context historically, the resonances of that. So I would encourage a sort of sense, a mutual sense of support in trying to achieve an identity of place.
Yes, I would agree that a unitary approach to architecture is doomed to fail. That's something I don't say lightheartedly because it's part of the history of our magazine, which started in the 60s and 70s and was quite ideological in terms of, Marxism and the critique of society. And as soon as you assume a singular standing point, it becomes an ideology, and then everything else is not important anymore. And that's the danger. And I think the beautiful way of looking at architecture is that it has so many aspects where you can work on, and that also empowers the individual to find her or his own approach towards this discipline, and not telling people how to act in general. Of course, you do have to have a kind of moral core in order to act in society. That's something different. But as an architect, you can even think about the steps you are working on and see it as something really important for the discipline, and others working on other scales. So the different scales of architecture give us the freedom to be individuals and to argue from individual point of views. And so I think that's the beautiful of architecture, the beauty of architecture in general. And so I would rather suggest to find your own point of view in this vast discipline, and in order to encourage you not to give up, because the problems are so vast and so difficult to solve at once and as an individual. And so you have to find your own approach. That's my...
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So
Yes, I agree totally. It's not something of fideistic we can give to the younger generation.
Yeah. So I think it's time to lunch, and I see you in 1 hour when Matthias will take the chair. Will manage this afternoon. So thank you so much to all of you, and see you later.
So for everyone, you find a lunch